All right, so we are going to start our panelist session with Q&A. I got a surprise notice that Bob Markmann would like to make a comment about this slide first. And so before we get into the Q&A session, I will let Bob take the floor.
So when Alan was talking about this particular slide, we just want to clarify that. Alan, you want to...
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So we got some questions about this slide, and I just wanted to clarify. So my apologies, I got some of the AWO terminology wrong. So this was actually a complaint that was lodged to us. So it wasn't an inspection report. There was a correspondence logged by the inspector. Basically, all the things I talked about are accurate, but it was not an inspection report, and that is the barrier to reporting the NCI, right? So that's why no non-compliances.
I can give more information.
Oh yeah, Gustavo, thank you.
I can give more information on this slide. And so what happened is, as Alan said, there was a complaint, and these are dogs moving across the border. These are dogs coming from Mexico, but this is not a regulated facility. So the animals moving, the organization is a nonprofit moving their own animals. They go to Mexico, they adopt their animals, and then they move them across the border. So our inspector went there to verify what was the situation. Do they need a license? Do they need a registration? And just following the regulation, they did not need a registration or a license. And because they were transporting their own animals, there was no citation, no NCIs, because again, we don't regulate them. We did advise them to improve their process. And what we understand is that the second shipment that they did, the process actually had improved. But again, I think, sorry for the confusion with this slide, but that is the story behind this.
All right, awesome, thank you. All right, so before we get started with this session, I just want to point out that all of the presenters that you guys saw today are in the panelist, and we've also added one. So Dr. Cody Yager is our avian field specialist with the Center of Animal Welfare, USDA, and so he has also joined our panel. So how this is going to work is I'm going to ask a question, and every single panelist that is on here is going to get a chance to answer, and then we will give it to you guys to see if you guys have any feedback in reference to that question or any follow-up questions to the responses from the specialist. All right. So our first question, what do you see as the biggest factor impacting animal welfare in transportation right now? So we will start with Stacy.
I probably see the thing that's impacting it most as being two things. One is the sharing of the information, and the second, the consistency of the information. Just as an example, and thirdly, probably more so than the first two, would be that there's a lot of animals in transit that aren't regulated, and I feel like those need to be regulated. So regulation, if we care about welfare of all animals, let's care about all of the animals, and let's get that message across. If they're not regulated, they need to act as though they are and provide for the welfare of those animals, and then be able to put their best foot forward.
Okay, Alan.
Thanks. Hi. So something that I touched on earlier, I think, is just getting the information out there on how transportation works from an international standpoint versus the interstate or intrastate commerce. So depending on the agency you work for or the private organizations that you work for, I think everybody has a different level of knowledge, understanding just some of the infrastructure and the logistics in place for travel, right? So that sometimes when the core understanding of how, let's say, just a regular cargo shipment moves into the country and then it moves from one side of the country to the other, if we're not, I guess, starting on the same basis point, that's going to create difficulties definitely when we're trying to enforce something. So I think that, again, I'm just going to hit on the message of outreach and getting that information out there on some of the processes and what we are trying to regulate. It's a good starting point to kind of get everybody on the same page so that we're moving in the right direction. Cody?
Cody?
I would say planning and preparing. I mean, That's the common theme I've heard in almost everybody's presentation today. It's expect the worst that's going to happen and plan and prepare for that in every single one. And so it's for transportation. What's the route? Let's plan for every factor in there and expect something to go wrong.
Chad?
Those are really great. And both of you managed to take what I was going to say. So, so option C, just I guess to kind of build off what you said, Alan and Cody, you know, getting the communication and the resources out there, especially to the entities that are registered that aren't aware of what the regulations and standards are, is an area that we definitely need to make sure that we're working on. Having meetings like this again, the communication, building contacts, professional contacts. I think this is how we get, start to get that done.
So I mentioned this morning. It's really lack of knowledge of the regulations. We could write regulations all day long. We can fix the ones that were 30 years old, 40 years old. But if people aren't going to follow them, we'll be in this boat time after time. Some of the things I mentioned today about citing things from 2023, we shouldn't be seeing that. We've been inspecting foreign carriers for 20 years. I don't know where they're coming up, but no bedding, no labels, no food and water certificates. It's right in the regulations. So unfortunately, we're not dealing directly with that. We're dealing with the airline. And then the airline's not usually even based at the airport. So you're kind of doing a lot of correspondence. It takes about 3 weeks for our reports to go online. So if we were there, they could see the pictures. But when the rescue groups come to pick up the dogs, it's a whole different situation because the dogs are in all new runs. The crates are dismantled, they're all disinfected, so they don't see the product coming in like we do. So we really have a lot of things to fix, but we just keep citing the airline. Well, what does that do? It means that airline in the future may not ship. So then they're gonna have to go to another airline. And this has been happening in LAX, it's happening at JFK. So they go shopping for airlines. Well, they're running out of airlines because we've done this to the domestic airlines too. Now, if I go to Philadelphia Airport, I'm down to 2 airlines that will ship. I inspect 9 or 10. So people say, well, how can we get these airlines to ship? It might be too late for some of the domestic airlines.
Dr. Dold?
So I was going to say preparedness too, but I think I will, I'll say mindset for us, because preparedness comes as a result of mindset. And so if you think about what you're doing with the animals that you're moving, and your mindset is, I want this to be the most innocuous or perhaps positive experience that it possibly can be, then preparedness would follow suit. I know I said precious cargo a couple of times in my presentation. Jim Jeswaldi was kind enough to point out to me that cargo may not be the right term for these precious live animals that you're moving. And so it should be in quotes. But the point is, if your mindset is, we want this to be innocuous, seamless, efficient, and safe, providing good welfare for the animals throughout, then that's your best position.
Dr. Soberano?
I guess Cody stole my thunder. So one of the things that definitely caught my attention was the number of transportation registrants that we have in such a short time. And the question for me always is, how are we reaching out to them, right? How aware they are of what they need to do. So that probably is one of the concerns. And if many of you are actually subcontracting with them, that mindset is important because it is things, ask questions, ask them what are they prepared to do in case of an emergency, in case of a situation in the road.
All right, now we want to hear from you guys in the audience and attending virtually. So what do you guys see as the biggest factors impacting animal welfare and transportation right now?
I think, and then this is from the perspective of a zoo and aquarium shipper, but I think you hit the nail right on the head in terms of education. I think on our end, what we see is a lot of times the cargo agents that we're dealing with are untrained. And often I'm the one walking them through the process of filling out the paperwork to get an animal on the plane. And these are major airlines, right? So I have a thought that I wanted to share because it's keep coming to mind. What is, or is there an overlap with the USDA and IATA specifically for air transport? And I think that may be a good conduit to some international educational opportunities for some of these things, because what's coming to my mind is I'm surprised there's not someone proposing a policy to limit importations of animals from other countries if that's such a problem. And if so much of your time is being spent at that one thing as an agency. So those are my two things, is I think education across the board, whether it's our education for us doing our best practices or passing the ball across the way to the transport companies, especially specifically in this case, airlines. That's just my thought.
Okay, does anyone on the panel want to respond to that?
Ayata.
Yes. So your comments about IATA and the live animal regulations, absolutely. You know, the Animal Welfare Act, obviously, are the regulations and standards that, you know, we look at that we're enforcing. When you look at the LAR, you do see some great supplemental information in there about, you know, just even birds. You know, that you're not going to necessarily find species specific transport standards for falcons, for, you know, budgies, et cetera. So it is a great additional reference and supplemental material thing. With the addition of myself and with Dr. Fitzhugh as well, I know that, you know, again, going back to, you know, put a focus on transport and transportation, we have begun to get into just very initially with the IATA, excuse me, with the LAR, because frankly, there are regulations that animal care has that are not in the LAR that should be, right? It needs to be updated.
Okay, we got another question or another response over here.
I want to dovetail off of what Paula said about training. IATA does have a certified live animal training program. And I'm wondering if maybe that is something that maybe there should be like a multi-government agency partnership that should be developed where people can partner with different agencies that have something to do with each other where live animal transport is concerned. Maybe Fish and Wildlife, the CITES office, USDA, and some of the other wildlife agencies, emergency management, and maybe become a component of their certified live animal transport, because those are the people that are being trained, that are loading the animals on the aircraft. And if they don't get the benefit of the veterinarians teaching them about animal health, or maybe behaviorists about animal behavior, maybe that could beef up their program to maybe give these people something that they're not getting out of that training program that they should be getting.
Okay, Karen, do we have any comment or?
I do. From what I've learned today, I would say registrants need to be regulated in the same way as licensees.
Panelists, any comment on that? Okay, then we'll go on to the next question or the next response.
kind of agree with that last statement, but back to the points you guys are making, IPATA as an organization does require their members to be LAR certified in order to be part of that organization. That's something that we're trying to do to support, those regulations and make sure that animals are treated properly. But we're just an organization. We have no authority, right? So figuring out how to bring in the authority of the US government, of the international governments, and get the buy-in from the airlines as to how important it is. And there are airlines that are buying in and are telling people that they cannot ship unless they are IPATA. Well, IPATA is not a cheap organization to belong to. So I think it goes back to being LAR certified, being compliant, all of those things. But the airlines are also trying to protect themselves, because if they can rely on an IPATA agent to ship an animal properly because they are certified, then that helps them. But I don't know if there is an all-encompassing answer, because we're talking globally. This is a problem, not just in the US, and USDA is strapped by the fact that you are a federal organization. So, but I love the idea of trying to get everyone to collaborate and agree that it makes sense to be certified and to have that education and enforce that education.
Okay, any comments from the panelists? Okay.
Really quick, Shannon, just to dovetail off of what you mentioned and also what Bob mentioned earlier. With IPATA agents, I think everybody should have a seat at the table. Everybody should be communicating and talking with each other. IPATA agents in other countries can help in the way that, as Bob mentioned, when you have international airlines that may be accepting animals that they should, in conditions or for whatever reason they're not compliant, it's oftentimes very difficult to get that message back to the originating station where that animal came from. Because when they're here stateside, inspections are conducted. Inspection exit briefings are conducted with, cargo managers and different things, but sometimes the breakdown in communication occurs at the originating station. So having the IPATA members, again, worldwide, that's a fantastic thing. And again, this is why we should all be at the table, putting our heads together when we encounter these issues.
Awesome, thanks. Does anyone else have any other comments?
In terms of challenges, I really believe that I understand the need to have to go back to the airlines as the carrier of record that allowed the animal to be transported. But with this ever increasing pressure on the airlines, more and more are going to drop out of providing the service for us, which in the end is just going to shoot everybody. So I think that's a real major challenge that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Karen. We have any more virtual?
I can.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So we've actually had a few conversations in the bird breeder world, the industry there, with some of the airliners saying, hey, we guys got to get on the same page. We're not, we can't just pass off all responsibility over here. And because there is a huge divide there. And I think we really on both of those groups need to get together. How can we in USDA help bridge that gap? I think we need to all, like Chad was talking about, we all come to the table. How can we do that? We are a great conduit, right? We both have contacts in both. So how can we do that? Because we started to do that already and we saw some great communication. Hey, this is one airline had these policies that these breeders didn't know about. And so they were taking these birds to them and getting denied at the counter. Now they're upset, everyone's unhappy, there's now business going on. So I think having those conversations and having those ability to communicate needs to happen.
Awesome. Any other panelist comments? Okay, our next comment.
I guess it's more of a follow-up question for the panelists and kind of based on your, issues you're seeing. I'm wondering if there's any room, like, in Chad's presentation, it showed that the registrants don't have the educational requirement that the licensees do. So I'm wondering if, even though I also would like to see them, to the same standards as the licensees, but is there at least room for changing that part if you're going from 500 to 8,000? Of course, you're not inspecting all 8,000 of them all the time. Can there at least be like that educational requirement or something? Do you see any space that could be part of the new requirements for registrants?
I mean, yes, we would love to see that. That is, I think, as you mentioned, with the significant increase in registered ground transporters, the field inspection force in animal care is, X amount of employees. And with the addition of new anything registrants, there's always, especially lacking in educational components. And when you're not requiring them to demonstrate compliance, that's a huge challenge. So, from a welfare standpoint, absolutely, we would, it would absolutely positively impact the animal's welfare.
Okay. Oh, you have another comment.
I was just going to follow up on
Go
that.
ahead, Bob.
So we've had a lot of new regulations in the last 3 years. While the world was dealing with COVID, animal care was dealing with a lot of regulation changes. The previous administration didn't have that many regulation changes, and then we got swamped with a whole bunch. The big rule, which is still having a big impact, is the relicensing rule. Going through and relicensing 1/3 of our licensees, and October 1st will be cohort 3. So we'll have 1/3 of our licensees going through this at the same time we may be getting thousands of bird regulations. People that need to be regulated because of the birds. It has a big impact. Then you start putting complaints on top of that and pre-licenses and high risk, high HIF facilities and a bunch of repeats. So like reaching out to all these intermediate handlers, if they're associated with an airport and the airport's a high inspection frequency, we may see some of them, especially if they're delivering or picking up. But 8,000 new registrants is a lot to deal with on top of all those other priorities.
One of the things I wanted to share is that we, animal care leaders, like you have regular meetings in person where we try to come up with solutions such as, so I wanted to repeat what I think myself and a couple other colleagues, we broke up into groups and discussed, trying to overcome these hurdles. One of the things that we had thought of for ensuring education components for registrants that, let's say the person applies for a registration, then there's a stopgap where they're given an email with the PDF of the transportation regulations. And then once they're ready to get the registration, they have to complete a quiz, some sort of a testing element, at least from the initial standpoint, that they know exactly what it is that they're signing up for and what is their contract with animal care once they decide to get registered with us. And I mean, at least it'd be one step. I mean, obviously we're talking needing a lot of technology, creating platforms in which, people, members of the public can come in and have access to these programs, but it could be really neat because if we can't inspect them all the time as registrants, because right now we inspect registrants more so on a complaint capacity just because of the workload that Bob was illustrating. It would be something at least so that they at least are aware, because sometimes when we go out on these complaints and follow up and hold them accountable for serious non-compliances, they say things like, oh, I didn't know that. And that's very disappointing. You don't even know what you're signing up for. So it'd be a great way to test them and maybe because they have to renew the registration every 3 years and then a refresher, not like a relicense, but something to that effect where they have to take another quiz or something like that.
Panelist?
Might put program support on the fence here, but I think it would really help. A lot of these groups now know how to register. So they'll get their new certificate, but if we include some type of correspondence saying, you know, now you're responsible for these regulations. Here's the blue book. Here's your contact information for your inspector in your area. Things like that would really help when they get that correspondence.
And I think, I may be mistaken, Ben, you can weigh in on this. I think that there are links currently that are provided to new registrants. And is that correct? And I think part of the problem is, like you said, half of the problem is just we, supply them with the materials, but we can't make them read them. We can't make them, compliant. You better read these regulations or else, they, again, in that case, they don't have to demonstrate compliance. And so that is certainly an issue where I think we can all agree. We need to make sure that we have more resources and alternate methods to be able to, give everyone the tools they need to make sure that they're transporting animals with great welfare in mind.
Karen? One major risk to welfare in transportation is the unpredictable nature of travel. The regulations are the same for a 1-hour trip or a 5-day trip, but I'm not sure that that should be the case moving forward. What would that look like to each panelist? Or what would you want it to look like?
Could you read that last sentence again?
What it says is, what would that look like to each panelist? And what I'm gathering is that if we changed it from not being the same for a 1-hour trip and a 5-day trip, what would that look like to you? What would you want it to look like?
Yeah, I can kick it off if I think I'm understanding the question correctly. So I'll use the example of a dog on a what was it? A 5-day trip versus a 1-day trip?
Or 1 hour?
Yeah, so I think on the wish list would basically just be if we can, I guess, cut through the hard part and get to the end where the regulations are updated and we all have the guidance more clear. So something that could be in place right now is wellness checks are supposed to happen every 4 hours, right? Piggybacking on the first answer I gave about just the logistics of travel, sometimes that just isn't possible, right? So air carriers, if your dog's in there, it's loaded in there on an international flight, there's not going to be representatives or anyone that's qualified to do a wellness check on an animal like when it's in transit. So the guidance, in the long term, we are dealing with trying to figure things like that out, again, within animal care and then more so within USDA. So if it is in transit for a 12-hour flight, then you can't meet that 4-hour wellness check guidance, right? But there should be, again, contingency planning that it's checked before takeoff, it's checked as soon as it lands. But then the way that airports are structured right now, that is difficult, right? I'm not talking about just air delays, I'm talking about AOA structure. So airfield operation area, I think that's what that stands for. So some animal care facilities are right on the AOA. But even then, if a plane lands, your deplane and your loading and all of that, when I used to work for CBP, we would say like 2 hours before a shipment's ready for inspection. That's okay for, non-perishable cargo. That's barely okay for produce, right? But when you're talking about livestock and horses, 2 hours, depending on the temperature, is not acceptable. So that guidance isn't really there. Well, it is there, but it's not very specific right now. But even if we got to the end point and that's all written out, the plan has to have a backup. I'm stealing again from our first presenter, that the plan has to have a backup plan, and then that has to have a backup plan, right? And that all has to be something that we work towards.
If I was looking at some of the needs from a 1 hour versus 5-day, something that we kind of don't really talk about, or we kind of put in the back burner, and is because of there is some safety concerns, but of enrichment. I mean, for 5 days, a bird, sitting in there who may be even a little stressed out, right, from transportation, and it's just sitting in a very, enclosure that doesn't have anything to do, well, it may then start feather picking, So I would really want to be focusing more a little bit about enrichment. What could we provide for this bird to, liven up the enclosure a little bit more to maybe distract it from doing some type of behavioral, misbehaviors or anything like that. I would also be, of course, looking a little bit more at food and water, an hour versus 5 days.
Okay, next comment.
I was just going to comment on that last one. So I've noticed, the airlines, their fees are pretty high right now. I had one person that was going to move a dog from Pennsylvania to Arizona. It was going to be $900. It was going to be $550 to ship it by truck. So instead of being there in 4 hours, you're looking at possibly 2 days. So I wish that would be under consideration too. Like, why would you want to go 2 days of traveling versus 4 hours? But right now, they're comparing that 900 over to 550. So a lot of things to work out, but it's really hard to change that mindset when it's money.
Just piggybacking on that situation, a lot of the time, the decision that we made sometimes is money, but sometimes the decisions are made by knowing what is going to happen or what is the situation. At least some of the decisions that we made is, yes, it might be half the price, but it's going to take longer, and these are the conditions. A lot of the time, the public doesn't know what they are paying for. So if they know that situation, then their choices might be different. And it is one of those things, again, we talk about those contingencies, right? And we do know that animals get stuck sometimes in airports because there's delay. They have to have those contingencies in place to be able to guarantee the welfare of those animals. And just trying to blame the airline because so whatever happened, that's not acceptable. They have to have a contingency process in place to guarantee that welfare.
Going back to the original question about what is the biggest concern for welfare, my initial answer was consistency across organizations, whether you're a rescue, a retailer, a wholesaler, a transporter, having a way to consistently enforce the same rules on everybody moving animals commercially. I think if I look at this though, from USDA's perspective, I think the biggest challenge right now to transportation welfare is resources. You're talking about a huge increase in the workload on the inspectors. You're talking about a huge need for additional education for inspectors and for loaders. Does USDA recognize that reality? Because looking at it from my perspective, I'm a lobbyist. If you are in a position of asking for additional funds for the training, staffing, and relocating of inspectors in your annual approps budget, that's something we can support. But if the agency isn't willing to recognize that they have vastly increased what they're asking the inspection side of the organization to do and asking for the resources to do it, then there's very little that any of us can do to support it. And there's very little you're going to be able to do in order to make it a reality.
Hi, so to back the train up, I think I spoke earlier in the beginning, Congress is very interested and aware that this transportation, there's a lot to be covered, a lot of areas of improvement. And what we can do, we are very aware that the ramifications on our field force. So how we operate is that, yes, we rely on public interest, congressional interest, internal and external interest. And I talked to Chad earlier, and all of our animal care employees know this. we are planning to add to the regulatory agenda transportation, most specifically live dog, but also increase what we can on the transportation reg. There is some statutory language in there, which is, as you know, very difficult to change. That's congressional. So we do plan to change it on the regulatory side because we are aware that with birds coming on board, and then if we did all of these transporters inspect, that is a huge lift. So we do need stakeholder assistance, but especially Congress, because that is a budget line item. So we are not going to jump out ahead and say, get inspecting on this when that isn't even in compliance with the regs. So we have to make sure and start with the regs. But for the FY24, which you probably where we're setting right now, that is on the list. It's very important. So this is why we're having the symposium today, because as many of you know, when you write a reg, the process is to do a proposed rule. And this is such an important reg that we would even back that up further and have what we have listening sessions. How many of you been on a federal listening session? So they carry a lot of weight, especially as much as we could with the bird and horse protection. So we're gonna have that same, I'm sorry, what's your name? Bob. So we're gonna have the listening sessions. We're having this session here, gathering comments. That will go directly in how, of course, whatever Congress writes in our omnibus to join that and write the reg and move forward. So it's many pieces to move a regulation that's, Chad, how old are you? 25, 1976, right? But that is, we have a new deputy now, Dr. Mulaney. There's probably about practically 3 regs we can put forward a year, right? A lot goes into that. This is one of our highest priorities. And Congress is going to give us that list to make it sure it gets on the agenda. So be ready for the proposed listening and be ready for the proposed rule. Watch our website, comments we get from here, feedback and surveys. That's all going to make the difference because it is a huge lift.
Awesome. I think we have a comment over here.
Well, I think you just answered my question because my question was, how can we help? How can we help get those things changed? I heard Chad say that there were tons of things you'd like to see, but how can we make them happen? And I really think that if somehow USDA can change the regulations so that there's testing involved, there's required something, whether it's, the law or whatever it might be, but some sort of testing, because inspections are a lot harder to do. Testing can be done online, right? So, but who's to guarantee that the right people are being tested? But, we can do what we can do. So I did have a question separate and apart from that for Alan. When you went through your presentation, you were talking about animals coming in for adoption and resale. That did not include pets. Are any of those animals that are coming in other than the CDC required from high-risk countries being seen by a veterinarian when they arrive?
For personal pets?
Not personal pets, for the adoption and resale.
Yeah, they're just part of the, I'll actually defer to AWO, but they're part of our regular inspection, schedule, right? I'm not using the right term, schedule, frequency. They're part of our regular inspection frequency.
Yes, so when animals come from other countries, they usually are moved to an intermediate handler, and the intermediate handler, they have a veterinarian. And actually, CDC has also, some say into that, because they are the ones who are also coordinating with the veterinarian. And Emily, that's right, Emily? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any additional comments? Karen, any additional comments? Okay, perfect. That was actually a good segue into our next question. So for each panelist in their unique area of expertise, if you could make one change to the regulatory requirements to improve animal welfare, what would that change be? Dr. Soberano, we'll start with you, sir.
Oh, man. That's a loaded question. So if I could do one thing, I mean, there are many things that we need to do. I think at this point, if we could do one thing, will be to be able to be a staff as what we need. We're severely understaffed at this point, and so we hope, if we could do something, is to really bring the people that we need in order to be able to do the inspections and that we need to do.
Dr. Dold?
I'm stuck on that one. I'm gonna pass, and I'll
Perfect.
elect to come back at the end.
Bob?
I think we have to update our regulations, especially for foreign carriers. Some of these shipments are lasting longer than 24 hours. As I mentioned this morning, some of the requirements are they have enough food for the 24-hour period. They're exceeding that. The litter that they're providing is not holding up unless these dogs can hold it that long. So we need to even work with some designers to come up with a better crate that can hold this moisture and that kind of volume for 2 days. And I think we really should probably have permanent primary enclosures that have food and water dishes secured to that door. This plastic stuff is not holding up for bulldogs, golden retrievers. 2 days in that crate there's almost nothing that will hold up every time. So unless it's more durable. So maybe changing some of those primary enclosure fixes.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bob. My personal wish, and there are many of them dealing with transport, would be to address times in transit. And it's not a small task, especially when you're dealing with, species, like domestic dogs, and then you have exotic animals, you have wild animals. So what does that look like? Ideally, if there could be rest periods, if there could be periods where, they could, get outside of their transport enclosure. And I know that's not feasible, facilities wise, that would be quite a task, but if I could snap my finger, that's exactly what I would do.
All right, Dr. Yager, we're just getting started with the bird regs, so tell us what you'd like to change already.
I know, exactly. We're not even like 1 week into it and you already want to change it here, okay? If it was just for transportation, I'm gonna actually steal Dr. Dole's about the transportation plan. I think that's a great idea. I think having a required transportation plan for every transport, is that what you guys were?
That is what we do.
I think that's a phenomenal. Let's make that a reg. There you go. You know who to thank that for. So.
Yeah.
I just want to say something quickly. I don't use my phone, but Cody Yager has been very casual today. I've only seen him with a suit and tie all the time. The regulations are out and he said, I'm done.
Drop the mic.
Okay, Alan.
So, you buying drinks tonight?
Yeah.
Well, before I get started, I've never seen Cody in a suit and tie yet, but maybe we'll have that pleasure later. If I could change one thing about the transportation regs, I would fast forward, not to the end, but there's, I guess, I'm gonna speak on behalf of, I guess, animal care. We have like a mental goal, I guess, in mind about strengthening this regulation so that there's consequence. I hope I don't overspeak here. That unfortunately, I guess, in the international importation and interdiction and all of this, a lot of it is deterrent. If there's no significant consequence, people just aren't going to learn sometimes, unfortunately, whether that be monetary fines or just pursuing it from a legal standpoint. So I know that puts some of the carriers in a difficult position. And I know that, that's not actually maybe the best way to move forward, but there's difficulties on both sides. So we want to get, I think a lot of the bad actors more compliant, and that is, still the #1 goal in animal welfare. So there has to be some real hard enforcement actions to get there.
Stacy?
I'd probably have to say consistency would be my word to change something. And that would be the consistency in who's licensed, who's registered, the consistency of the training of the inspectors and the transporters and who is implementing the regulations and the enforcement of those. And also consistency of those who aren't regulated. And I would probably do that through ICE, through individual communication and education like this today, and encourage everybody to share it with your club members, your group members, the people that you're working with, so that we can, that everybody can be aware that there are rules and regulations that need to be followed, and to try to get as much on the same sheet of paper for consistency of the message. And that even goes for that person who's traveling with their pet, or the rescue organization. If licensees and registrants are having to follow these rules, it needs to be consistent that people want to do better, even if they're not required to be licensed or registered.
Thank you, Stacy. Dr. Dold?
Yeah, so I'm sorry about passing before, but I swear,
Nothing to
I
be
thought
sorry
you
about, I
said, what's the one change we could make to all of the regulations that would improve animal welfare? Or was it
Cody
just
said you
about
already had the
transport?
answer.
What's that?
It's about anything.
Anything. So
Anything you could change in your expertise.
that's what overwhelmed me. So it's not about change so much as it is about encouragement. Working for SeaWorld, working for an accredited zoo that is also licensed. We have the good fortune of both being licensed and being a partner, licensed by and a partner with USDA in licensed by the current standards and engaged in helping to advance those standards. We're also AZA accredited. We have other AZA members here in the room. And we have standards. And so that partnership and the synergy that happens when these two communities come together and look at what we in the AZA community do well, and then understand what the challenges are that the USDA has working with folks who are not accredited, are at the other end of the spectrum in terms of how they approach animal care, the resources they have, and otherwise. So it's not one change, but it is, I think that synergy is incredibly important for animal welfare, particularly zoo animal welfare and aquarium animals. And I would like to see more of that.
Awesome. All right. So now that we've heard from the panelists, we'd like to know what you guys would like to change. And I'm going to up the ante a little bit. Not only would we like to hear what you guys would like to change, I'm going to make it a little bit more specific, but you can answer that as well. We'd also like to hear what kind of non-human primate changes to regulations that you guys would like. So any regulation as well as non-human primate. I know we haven't gotten the presentation today, but we will be getting it tomorrow. And so if you have any changes to the non-human primate regulations, we'd also like to hear that.
So I get to step away from the dog reg stuff, talk about NHP regs a little bit, so that's nice. One of the things that I think CDC would like to see with our NHP regulations in particular is more flexibility as new diagnostic tests and screening tests become available. I think it's really important to have flexibilities built into our regulations that allow us to update and accept those test results with the times. For those of you who import NHPs internationally, right now our tuberculosis regulations are quite strict in terms of the TB tests that we require. There are a lot of new diagnostic tests that are being tried and utilized around different non-human primate research centers across the US, but we're somewhat limited in how we can accept or utilize those tests. So I think we'd like to see some built-in flexibility that allows for us to adapt and advance as science and diagnostics move forward.
Awesome. Does anyone have any comments about any regulations or non-human primate regulations that we'd like to see increase for the welfare of animals or change? Perfect.
With respect to Dr. Dold's idea which inspired Dr. Yager's enthusiastic response. And that was a silent, unarticulated idea that Dr. Dold had. There's nothing to preclude the agency and the Center for Animal Welfare following this very informative meeting to develop an animal care aid or a tech note on transport plans, noting that even though transport plans are only required under the marine mammal regulations, a byproduct, I note parenthetically, of the marine mammal negotiated rulemaking, which was developed by consensus. And if you take that and the bird regs, you have a lot of great innovative ideas you could spread across the other regulated species. But anyhow, you could develop that animal care aid or tech note suggesting that this is a good practice to protect animal welfare, to provide additional insurance, not only for the animals, but for your organization.
That's a great idea. And Chad just wrote that down. So I think he just assigned it to himself.
Shannon, I have one.
Okay, go ahead, Karen.
I would love to see prohibition on the premature maternal separation of primates without medical necessity. We regularly see CVIs showing primate infants being transported at 2 and 3 weeks old for the pet trade, despite extensive literature showing the long and short-term consequences for mothers and babies that this practice causes.
Our non-human primate specialist over here was shaking her head, so I think that was a really good comment. Yes, nodding her head up and down, up and down. Okay, any other comments? Okay, next question. How would a transporter benefit by having an agreement or an MOU with a veterinarian? Stacy?
Say it one more time.
How would a transporter benefit by having an agreement or an MOU with a veterinarian?
The welfare of the animals.
I mean,
Yeah, everybody's really excited to answer this question. I'm gonna steal all the good answers, I think. So, yeah, just the educational component, right? The two things might not be related, really. The transporter is not gonna know about each and every animal that they're transporting. To have an AV on staff, they're going to just be able to educate them on what's on the very basic level, what's the safest and most, humane way to transport the animal. Can we save some for you guys? Or?
I mean, as we already talked about, I mean, things are going to happen on transportation. Cuts are going to happen. Animals are going to get sick. It's going to be really good to have that discussion already, have a plan in place, but also have a phone number when something bad happens. Hey, doc, this dog is doing XYZ. This bird is doing ABC. What do I do? So having that plan in place and the contacts, that's going to be literally life and death. Read that answer.
So obviously it's going to improve animal welfare. I just want to point out that it already has. I hope you don't mind, Dr. Bryant, but we already do have an airline who has a staff veterinarian, and it has improved animal welfare, and it's started discussion. And it is, Dr. Yager talked earlier about, policies, airline policies and welfare. And so, I mean, it's not a fantasy, it's already happened. And, it would be ideal to have every registered transporter have an MOU with a veterinarian or have an agreement with a veterinarian. When animal incidents happen, they could be reviewed. What could we do better? Is there anything that we could have done to prevent that?
So I've been fortunate to have a couple of those MOUs. I had a veterinarian in my area that would pick up any animal at the airport that was held and couldn't get transferred for this reason or that, or had veterinary care issues. And he would pick it up 24/7. His daughters are now registered with us. I've seen that work well at the bonded facilities where they have a full vet staff and someone on call after hours when some of these shipments could possibly come in. So that has worked really well.
I'm not at all biased, but pretty much everything is better when a veterinarian is involved. So
Amen.
Okay, does anyone have any comments in the? Okay, we have one.
Caveat of a USDA certified veterinarian. A USDA certified veterinarian. Because a lot of the other veterinarians don't know all the rules and regulations that are required.
Yeah, that's a great point right there. An accredited USDA veterinarian, yes, that would be a great addition.
Any other comments? Karen?
We just have questions, wanting to know what airline you were referring to.
Dr. Brian, is it okay if we say who?
Hi there, I'm Dr. Bryant, and yes, I'm a veterinarian. I work with the airline. I'm with Delta Airlines. I've been on staff with them since 2018. I do think having a veterinarian on staff for an airline is very beneficial for reviewing the policies and procedures for animal transportation, connecting with other stakeholders with the transportation of animals. So I think it's a benefit.
Okay, we have any other comments? Karen? No? Okay, I will let anyone on the panelist jump in on this one. Is a veterinarian needed in a transporter's contingency plan? Anyone?
The question is if a veterinarian is needed in a contingency plan. Yeah, there is actually a section in the contingency plan. If you look at the form that says veterinarian's name. So yeah.
I guess, could you elaborate a little bit more on maybe what their role is in the contingency plan?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Can you elaborate a little bit more on maybe what their role is in the contingency plan?
If I can elaborate more? Yeah, so basically every facility has an AV, right? So their AV should be the one that is listed in that contingency plan. If, we were talking about MOUs and with veterinarians, so if you are gonna be, as a transporter, gonna be basically moving animals, having a veterinarian contact for emergencies is an important point. So then.
Okay, so Chad, we'll let you close us out.
And with that said, thank you guys very much. You guys have a wonderful evening, and we will see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock.